Hi, this is Peter Devine again, and we're back looking at the scale that we looked at in my last video. We're still just fooling around with the scale, really trying to calibrate it. I mentioned before that when we calibrate a scale, the first thing we want to do is set all the weights to zero, and then we want to look at this pointer here and make sure it's at zero. Well, there's always error. Uh, let's just take a quick look. It's pretty close, but what is interesting about these scales is that there's a lot of friction. So now it's just below the 0 point. If I press this here, let's see what happens and see if it ends up stopping at some other place. Well, it seems to be stopping at the same place. I'm going to take this little screw and give it a little more ballast in the other direction and see if this thing actually works. And it does, I guess. Here's the point. You'll notice on the scale that we have little demarcations, and the smallest demarcation represents 1/10 of a gram, which is very nice, of course. But the fact is that the sensitivity of our scale may not actually be represented by those little marks. If I change this to 1/10 of a gram, it may barely push the scale. And I haven't tested it out. I'm going to do all my testing right online as we're working here. So we could just see what happens to this little point here to 0 now. What happens if I just move this here? Now it should bring the scale, to below the 0 point if it's actually working properly. And yes, it does. It goes just a tiny bit below that 0 point. Very interesting. So it tells us that indeed, if we're careful, I'm very skeptical about these scales. I'm skeptical about, measuring scales and things like that. We've got to be sure that it's really giving us some interesting information that we can use. So let me put it down to 2/10 of a gram just to see what's going on. What happens if we tip the scale and after putting it down a little bit heavier, instead of going down, it goes up? Well, it is going down a little bit more. So it does look like, oddly enough, the scale is working. Now, what I'm going to do now in this video is I'm going to take this weight here. It should be marked how heavy this weight is. No, I can't. Oh, there it is. Okay, let's see what it has here. 100. Okay, so according to this thing, this is 100 grams. All right, it's a weight. It says, let's see if we can look at that. Let's see. Let's say 100 grams. Maybe you'll just have to take my word for it if you can't see it, because we're not really well lit here in this studio. I'm going to put this weight here, and let's see where it brings us. There are various ways in which we can make 100 grams. One way, I'm going to put this to 0, okay? And now I'm going to put this all the way to 100 grams. Let's see what it does to our scale. Oddly enough, the scale sinks to the bottom when we put this on our 100 grams. And let's make sure that's right. No, now it's doing okay. Very interesting. Okay. I'm very skeptical about whether these scales work or not. But in this case, it has worked. And amazingly enough, what we have is the scale actually, at the 0 point here, when we put this 100-gram weight on, when we put that at 100 grams. So it's a big surprise to me that this thing actually works at all, uh, even as accurately as it does. Now, I'm going to put this 100 weight thing back to here, okay? And I'm going to take this weight and put that at 100 grams and see what happens. And you have to be very careful because these weights, they're made to, they're kind of etched in somehow to be at the right weight. And there we have it. Amazingly enough, folks, this 100 weight indicator seems to be very much in keeping with our 100-gram weight here. And it's just a little bit lower, a tiny bit lower. It looks like maximum 1 or 2/10 of a gram difference. So point is, we're always going to have some kind of error in these scales. We want to get a feeling for how much error is in the final indication of how much weight we have, how much weight we have in this pan, and we need to keep our eye on it and test it out more and more. This is just a tiny bit lower than the 0 point, so that's something to be investigated. But as you can see, there is some slight error. 100 grams and 1/10 of a gram, that's a 1,000, an error of 1/1000, which you might say, well, that's not very much at all. But it depends on what you're trying to weigh and what you're trying to do. It could be an important difference, and it definitely needs to be noted and taken into account. And so we want to keep on researching this scale and the weights. Remember, there could be an error in the weight we're using too. So that's why we have to do all kinds of interesting experiments to get a real feeling for how accurate the scale is. So I want to thank you, and I will be back. This is Peter Devine. I will be back with another video in the near future about the scale. Thank you very much.